Where do I find the words to sum up this day? You might have noticed that we didn't have the music for this podcast, and there was a reason for that. Is because I just want you to appreciate the gravity of this day for human history and for our lives. If the disciples had have known that we called this day Good Friday, I think at best they would have been perplexed, at worst offended. When you read of this day in the Gospels, it does not seem like a Good Friday. But for those with eyes to see, even in the midst of this great tragic suffering and cross, there is hope to be found. Let me just give you a quick overview of the day. A lot happens. We heard that at night Judas betrays Jesus, Thursday night, and perhaps very early in the morning, like 1 a.m.-ish, Jesus is arrested. He undergoes a mock Jewish trial under the Sanhedrin at night. I say mock, not just because they accused him of things that he obviously didn't do, but that it was by night, which was actually against their own rules. So we see in the Gospels that as the morning arrives, they run a second trial, a formal trial, just to confirm the decision they had made. We read as well of Peter's triple denial that leads him to weep bitterly. We read of Judas's not only his betrayal the night before, but on the Friday he hangs himself in remorse. We then read of several phases of a trial of Jesus before the Romans, because the Jews didn't have power to crucify him. They needed the Roman powers to do that. We read of Herod and Pilate judging Jesus. And then we read the slow and painful walk as Jesus carries his cross outside Jerusalem to Golgotha, where he would die. There he is crucified. He dies, and then he's buried. Doesn't really seem like a Good Friday, does it? Again, it is hard to capture in words the gravity of this day. Let me just remind you for a moment about what crucifixion was. It was invented by the Persians about 300 years before Jesus, and the Romans actually stole it off them. They used it as a way to kill the worst of the worst. If you were a Roman citizen, you weren't allowed by law to be crucified. That's how bad it was. And the idea of it was so that someone would see a person hanging on a cross and feel so appalled at their humiliation, their nakedness, their shame, their pain, so appalled that they would not do what that person did. So it was reserved for the worst criminals of all. This is the way our Lord Jesus, the good teacher, the most loving man to ever have existed, was killed. You know, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they really stare into the suffering and pain of the cross. Among other things, it's not all that. They also point to the hope, but they really do show the forsakenness of Jesus on the cross. And then we have John's Gospel, probably written last, which does show all that, but it also points to this actually being a moment, strangely, of kingship and glory. It's not that we want to rush too quickly to the good news of Easter Sunday. We can't really hold the resurrection and the cross too far apart, but it is good to remember, as the author to the Hebrews wrote in Hebrews 12:2, let us look only to Jesus. He is the one who began our faith. He makes our faith perfect. And then it says this: Jesus suffered death on the cross. but he accepted the shame of the cross as if it were nothing. He did this because of the joy that God set before him. He went through with it because he knew of the joy set before him. Not only that, in the early letters we read Paul talking of the cross, about the way God used this shameful moment for good. This is where I'll end. Paul writes, "Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world, a cross, to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world, crucifixion, to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him." For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. I really struggle to do this podcast because I just feel inadequate, not up to the task of summing up the meaning of this day. But I hope you can tune in tonight for Friday Night Live to hear more about the meaning of this cross and the hope to be found there.